All right, you guys. This is my video for advanced electronic music, and I'm discussing using modulation in synthesizers. So you guys from Tuesday know that I talked about modulation with synthesizers, but I wanted to post a video as well, just reiterating all these things so you can go and look at it if you have questions. And then for my Thursday group, this is also just a something for you to look at, and we're going to cover this in class today, but it will also be up, and there'll be another quiz this week too covering this material, so that you can, so I can make sure you've looked at it. Okay. So as we know, there are three principal components of a synthesizer, right? The sound sources, the oscillators, or the sound recordings, or whatever it is that makes the sound. Then the filtering of that sound, or that collection of oscillators. And then the last thing is that amp envelope, right? And that amp envelope, we've talked about being so important to shaping our sound because it's based on how fast the notes attack, how fast the notes decay and release, and all that. And that really shapes the sound in some ways more than anything else. So there's a fourth one that I want to add on here, which is called modulators. And modulators are found in most synthesizers as well. And what they do is they basically allow me to have another parameter kind of in motion inside the synthesizer, okay? So if we talk about what modulation is, modulation in synthesis means to change or control a parameter with a vector line, like automation, in real time, okay? So this can be done in many different ways, but most commonly we use either a modulation envelope, like the amp envelope, but it's called a mod envelope, or an LFO, okay? So an LFO, again, stands for low frequency oscillator, and it's one of those things oscillating back and forth over the course of a sound, all right? So modulation, a second or multiple ADSR envelopes are used to map the motion of another parameter, like filter cutoff, for example, is a very common and very useful one. So we do see modulation envelopes, which look just like the ADSR for the volume output, but they are usually assignable to something else, okay? And then the second one is as an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. A low frequency oscillator is a wave oscillating below the audio rate, which we know to be 20 hertz, and is used to map the motion of a parameter. So both of these things are mapping motions to parameters, but in different ways. And there are way more than this too. There's also something called a sequencer that we can use in alchemy to do this as well. So there are other methods for oscillating sound and changing sound with modulation. The mod envelope is a second or multiple ADSR envelopes used to map the motion of the parameters. Just like I said, this is example actually is from vintage synth, or what is it? Retro synth, sorry. And it's using the filter envelope here. The filter envelope is the one used to do the modulation. It's the mod envelope. Here you can see you can choose the type of LFO. And then, okay, so that's all I want to talk about with these. So let's take a look at this. And then I'm going to also cover a couple other things. But really this video is about modulation. So in Logic, let me just show you how we do this in Logic. So again, remember I'm assigning oscillation to some other parameter in this sound. So if we listen to this sound right now, oops, sorry. It's very simple. This is actually the default preset in Alchemy. What I want to do is I'm actually going to do something very obvious, and that's change the pitch of this. So remember, modulation can affect anything. So any parameter for the most part can be changed via modulation. So what I want to do is I'm going to go, I'm using oscillator A. I'm going to stick with the global tracks, or just that shows them all, because all I'm going to do is modulate this tuning knob right here, okay? And this tuning knob does exactly what you'd think it does. It tunes the sound via half step, right? So It actually is tuning the sound via half step, and as I turn that knob, it makes sound. So the most common type of modulation is to assign this knob to oscillate with an LFO, okay? So I'm gonna do that down here. What I have to do is when I want to assign a knob, I have to select it so that it turns blue. And then you can see down here in the modulation area, it says modulation, coarse tune A, because that's what I have selected. If I go to pan, notice that this changes to pan, okay? So coarse tune A, and I'm going to turn this on, and then it's saying, okay, you want to modulate coarse tune A. What are you using? Well, I go to the pull down menu, and as you can see, there is all kinds of stuff that I can use, but the most common ones you're going to use are these first four. In fact, probably more than anything, this sequencer, the ADSR, and the LFO. So I'm going to use LFO 1, which is fine. It's an LFO that's already been created automatically by Alchemy. I click on this, and as you can see, over here is my LFO. It says LFO 1, currently LFO 1, and it's a sine wave, and it's oscillating at the quarter note because it's synced. If I turn sync off, you'll notice that the rate becomes in hertz, right? So if I turn sync back on, then it adjusts based on tempo, which obviously is probably the more common thing that you're going to do. So right now, I've assigned LFO 1 to modulate the coarse tuning of A, which is the first oscillator, right? Here it is. So one last thing that I have to do is add some depth to this, because essentially right now, without any depth, I have my oscillator here has no volume. It has no it has no vertical push at all, so it's nothing. And when I turn this up, look what happens up here to my tune. You can see this yellow line appears, or orange line, showing you the range of that oscillation, okay? And if I turn this knob, you'll notice that the oscillator, the oscillation moves with the knob to show you the oscillation range of the notes, okay? So now when I hit a note, it's going to oscillate back and forth in coarse tuning, and you'll even see a little line oscillating back and forth. Here we go. Okay, so the more or less depth I put into this is what's going to change how much is oscillated. Look, if I really stretch this out, I get even more oscillation from this with more intense depth, okay? So, and if I want just a little bit of oscillation, like say I'm trying to just create a little bit of a vibrato effect, that's probably still, I actually probably wouldn't use coarse tuning, I'd use the fine tuner for this. But I can adjust this so it just oscillates a tiny bit. And if I also turn the rate way up, up, not down, to 32nd notes, you can hear what it does to my sound. So the coarse panning right now is being controlled by this LFO that is oscillating it back and forth, and this is what modulation is, okay? So let me turn this off and actually do a different one. I'm gonna actually assign this first modulation to, let me get this back to 0, my LFO, my filter cutoff, okay? So I'm going to turn the resonance up so that, remember, the resonance is the peak right before the cutoff of my filter. I'm going to turn that up, and what I want to do actually is modulate the cutoff frequency. So listen when I play my sound now. If I change the cutoff filter, you can hear it doing the wah, rah, right? The filter is coming in and out as I turn that knob. So what I want to do is actually modulate that so that it automatically turns itself. So once again, I select this, and you'll notice that it says now filter cutoff in the modulation area, right? I'm going to turn it on, and I'm actually going to choose a different LFO. Let's choose LFO new. And what that does is it automatically makes LFO 2, right? You can see LFO now says 2, and it's a sine wave, and the shape of it, again, is this. So I can change the shape if I want. I can actually choose all sorts of really cool stuff, and what that's going to do, of course, is really whack out my cutoff, because now it's going to oscillate at a very strange rate, okay? So you'll notice though, again, this is not going to work until I turn up the depth, right? If I don't turn this depth up, I will not get any modulation. So, and again, turning up that depth is going to make this cutoff show a yellow line as it shows the range of the modulation. Okay, so let's crank up the depth. Notice my cutoff. Now listen to what this sounds like. Okay? So that's a little weird, and it's because I have this really funky LFO shape. Let's do something interesting though. Let's take this down and actually take this all the way down to a really slow rate. Add some more resonance. So you can hear now my envelope is tracking this line, right, which is kind of a random line a little bit. And that line is being placed on my LFO, right? Now again, what's most common is to hear things like a sine wave, right? So you would get a sine wave that's synced to the quarter note and it sounds like this. Right? Or if I have, I was talking the other day in class about the classic dubstep low bass sound, right? Those sounds are created using LFOs, right? Your classic wub-wubby sounds from 2014 are created using LFOs and using modulation of a sound, all right? Now I can do some other cool things too, basic shapes like a ramp up, right? And you'll hear what this does. It's going to start low and then go up and then jump back down to the bottom, right? And there are just endless things you can do. Here's a random pattern of steps, okay? So anyways, it's kind of endless. And again, I can have multiple things running at one time, all right? So that's really important to remember. What I'm gonna do is this. I'm gonna leave that LFO going. I'm gonna go to my global, or just my oscillator A, because A has its own filter in itself. And so I'm gonna turn on the filter for A, turn the resonance up high, and do a separate filter, okay? So I'm going to select this, click on Mod A, and now I'm going to have two modulations running at once. I'm going to go to LFO, new LFO again, and this time I'm going to do just a sine wave, all right? So, and again, cannot forget to crank up the depth, okay? Crank up the depth to get that modulation working, and then I should hear this. I should hear two modulations at once now. I'm going to hear the crazy funky modulation from the overall modulator. In fact, I think this is actually just, oh yeah, it is. It's the random steps. In fact, let me put this back to random glide. Yeah, the one that goes up and down, all right? And then in addition to that, now I'm also filtering this by itself. All right, so let's hear what this sounds like. Okay, so do you hear this? What we're getting is this eighth note modulation along with, let me make this even bigger. So there's a modulation of two different filters at the same time here, correct? We're hearing this kind of funky oscillation back and forth, and then in addition to that, there's this rising oscillation from the random glide, okay? Or if I do something like this, back to another funky pattern. So now I'm getting the modulation here, this cutoff modulation, in addition to this cutoff modulation, okay? So, but I can also do more than that. Like, so, you can imagine I can make some pretty complex sounds now. I'm gonna turn on waveform 2. B. Let me go up an octave here. Find something interesting. Let's go to complex. Let's try one of these metallic sounds. So that's pretty cool. Actually, I really kind of digging this sound. I want to create something really cool where this upper sound kind of rises over the course of the time, right? Maybe the sync will be bigger. So what I'm going to do is actually click on Course Tune, and then you can see Course Tune B has popped up over here. I'm going to say on, and I'm going to select, this time I'm going to choose an ADSR, okay? So we talked about an LFO, now I'm going to use another ADSR to make that riser of this sound, okay? Just so you know, ADSR1 is always assigned to the amp envelope. It's our main amp envelope output. It could be that I assign this LFO to the same envelope, but I'm going to try a new ADSR, okay? And what I want to do is create a thing that rises really slowly. So what I'm going to do is actually grab this, grab the attack and drag it over a bunch, okay? And and I don't know how much, it's 1.6 seconds. Oh, I reset it. Let's just set this to 2 seconds, okay? And now I'm going to assign the course tune to that 2 seconds, and I'm going to click on depth and start turning it up. Now, I don't want this to move a lot. I want it to move up maybe a perfect fifth. So I'm actually going to go, it says steps here. I'm choosing 5 or 7 because that's a perfect fifth. Let's hear what we get. Okay, so you are hearing lots of funky sounds now in here. I can also, I might actually do this. I might crank this up an octave and then let it also rise another fifth. Here we go. Okay, so you can hear how I'm using multiple oscillators and multiple modulation to make this do something interesting. Okay, so let's make this even more complicated by adding a third element. I'm going to add another waveform, and I'm actually going to choose something. Let's choose a square wave. I'm actually going to lower this sound an octave, okay? Okay? And I'm going to use a different type of modulation to make this do something cool too. I actually want to modulate the panner, all right? So what I'm going to do is turn this on, and notice how it says pan C. And I'm going to link this to what's called the sequencer. I'm going to make a new sequencer, and then we get this stepwise motion here. And I can make a pattern now of my modulation. And it's just going to automatically map this to whatever I choose here to the parameter that I've chosen. I've chosen pan, and I'm choosing to crank this depth up quite a bit. In fact, I'm going to actually spread this out so it should actually move a lot. Let's hear what this sounds like. Right, so that low sound is kind of oscillating at the lower level, right? And it's oscillating the pan. Now let's do something else too, where you do a crazy filter cutoff with this. So I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to crank up the res on this. And actually, I think I'm going to turn this down 2 octaves, minus 24 semitones. I'm going to click on, again, the cutoff filter, turn it on, cutoff C, select the sequencer again. I'm going to choose a new sequencer, okay? You can also see here down here, my note value of the sequencer is the 16th note, okay? So I'm going to now turn this, make another pattern here, like something. Maybe I want to do something like this, where it's kind of oscillating like this. We're getting a kind of a pattern that's repeating. And I'm going to crank up the oscillation. Oh, sorry, and I need to turn this down to see the yellow line. Now I should hear. Now, I'm going to turn these off for now, just so we can hear this one by itself. So you can hear the pattern now developing because of the oscillator, right? So it's kind of a neat sound. It's just adding another layer of modulation, right? Anyway, so this is how this is done. And if you pull up a complicated sound in Max, or sorry, in I'm going to choose another sine wave here on the last one. If you pull up a complicated sound on Alchemy, you're most likely going to have a pretty dynamic sound like this. Now I'm going to turn this down 36, so that pulls it down 3 full octaves. Should give me a nice subtone. Right? So, I mean, it's not the most profound sound. This also, of course, would sound way better with, like, let's add some distortion. You gotta watch that. And maybe, I don't know, something that kind of spreads that sound out. Actually, one of the best ways to spread this sound out would be go back to Alchemy and really crank my voices up. Let's put this at... and then it's going to get wider as we add more sound to it. Also, just a delay or a reverb, sorry, is going to help a little bit here to give me more sound. Obviously too much. Turn that mix down, the wet down. Anyways, not the most profound sound I've ever made. I feel like when I think about my skills as a composer or electronic musician, synthesizer design is one of my weaker spots. I feel like I'm not great at it. But I basically want to just cover this concept for you. So we covered this on Tuesday in class, but I just wanted to give you a video so that you could follow this closer and really, if you wanted to review what I'm talking about with modulation, you could do it, okay? And again, these modulations are available in almost all synthesizers, okay? So, and they're different, of course, based on the type of synthesizer it is, but more and more commonly, in a synthesizer, you can see the modulation actually changing the sound. Like, they visually try and give you that cue, okay? But that's not always the case. And a good example of that not being the case, for instance, let me just pull up retro synth. This is the kind of thing where you don't see the modulation, but it does happen, all right? So here's this is their preset. Okay, and if I wanted to add modulation, what I would do is I would need to use the filter envelope or the LFO. Okay, I'm going to use the LFO in this situation, and I also want to sync it to tempo. So I'm going to flip this switch, and then you can see it's set to 8th notes, triplets. So let me fix this and put it on 8th notes only. I'm going to do the same thing, change the modulation envelope here, or the filter envelope, to modulate back and forth, all right? So what I want to do then, and the thing is with RetroSynth, it's a little less flexible because it's meant to kind of show you it's designed to be like a retro synthesizer from the 1970s where the flexibility was way less. So you can't assign the LFO to anything like you can in Alchemy. But you can assign it, for instance, to the filter cutoff. So, and the way this would work is I would actually, right now, I'm going to crank up the resonance, which again gives us that peak right at the resonant cutoff. And then I need to turn up the LFO. So right now the LFO is at nothing, and I'm going to turn the envelope off. Okay? And now, well, I'm not hearing anything. Why is that? What did I do? I broke it. Yeah, so now you can hear the modulation now with the filter. And the more I turn this up, the more you're going to hear that modulation of the frequency. So what you're hearing is actually the cutoff going wow, 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 right? It's bouncing back and forth. You're just not visually seeing that. I can turn this down. So now you're really hearing that. And again, more resonance I give it, you get this kind of dramatic peak in the sound. In fact, you're starting to hear the harmonic series in there. It's kind of super cool. But I could also assign this to the filter envelope. Filter FM. So you can see how I'm creating a more complex sound using modulation on this sound, okay? And as I've mentioned before, you know, like I was saying in my class, one of my biggest complaints about student projects is that you guys tend to have very simple sounds and they don't do a lot. They're kind of static, right? And more interesting sounds are going to be more dramatically in motion over time. And that's how you can do really cool stuff in these synthesizers, okay? So your assignment using Alchemy is going to be due next week. I need to finalize it by tomorrow, but basically I want you to create a sound and then explain it. So the plan will be Tuesday. The class on Tuesday will explain their synthesizers. You'll each come up and talk about your synthesizer and how it works. And the other group will do the same on Thursday, okay? As really a way of me understanding that you understand how synthesizers work, right? So please review this video, and then Thursday's class today, this is what we'll be covering. So this is just a supplemental to that. All right, I'll talk to you soon.